Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
There we go. All right, so we are in this text, Approaching the Buddhist Path. And remember, this is one volume of many volumes. And the opportunity here is to get a good grounding in how we approach a Buddhist path, as we then will go in much more detail about how the path unfolds and how these teachings apply to our own lives. We are currently at a little bit of the history of Buddhism, and today the part of the text read is a little synopsis of the Buddha's life, and then there's a great deal of in-depth teaching on the evolution of Buddhism, the history of Buddhism, the different schools of Buddhism, the way it spread, the conflicts that took place, some sort of ideas about Buddhism that may not be very accurate, and this evolution of Buddhism in the different schools of Buddhism. Very detailed, very intricate. And then coming up to, how taking all these teachings in a whole, as a whole, that they complement each other, and see how we can really approach it, recognizing how they are really part of a whole and not so separate as they may appear. So very big task tonight, and I don't want to get caught up in the minutia of some of the very incredible detail that they went into to describe this evolution and capture sort of the essence of, I think, the points that His Holiness and Thubten Chodron wanted to make. So having said that, I think from my side that they did a very good synopsis, very short synopsis on the key points of the Buddha's life that I think most people can all agree upon. And I think it's good to know if you don't already know it. So I'm going to pop up the text right there. And it's just a couple pages. We'll just go through that. Oops, I didn't share it. I just popped it up for me. So let me pop it up for you. Some of you I know do not have the text, so probably not very helpful. I don't pop it up. Okay, share screen. There we go. That's what. So Buddhism in our world began with Shakyamuni Buddha, who in the view common to all Buddhists was born as Siddhartha Gautama, a prince from the Shakya clan, most likely in the 5th century BCE, near what is today the India-Nepal border in the area of Lumbini, which a lot of Nepali get very tricky about. People say Buddha was born in India, and Nepalis are, no, he's born in Nepal. So back then it wasn't Nepal, but it currently is. So you gotta be careful that the Nepalis know. Yeah, he was born in the Lumbini area. His kind heart and great intelligence were evident from childhood. Despite a sheltered life in the palace, he ventured into the town where, for the first time, he saw a sick person, an old person, a corpse. This prompted him to reflect on the suffering living being's experience. And after seeing a wandering mendicant, he aspired to be free from the cycle of constantly recurring problems called samsara. So yes, a prince, as the story goes, he snuck out one night with one of his aides and went out in the town, and this is where he got to see life, right? Aging, sickness, and death. And it just moved him so much that he was inspired to see if there was a way to escape this cycle of aging, sickness, and death, and rebirth. Disillusioned with the pleasures of palace life and seeking liberation at the age of 29, he left his family and royal position. He shed his elegant clothing and adopted the lifestyle of a wandering mendicant. So 29 years old, he takes off. He studied and mastered the meditation techniques of the great teachers of his time, but he saw that they did not bring freedom from cyclic existence. So the stories go that, the two of the greatest meditation teachers of his time, he went and studied with one of them, went through all the trainings, achieved, great degree of samadhi, and even the teacher would say, hey, come teach with me now. And he thought, no, I don't think that's quite it. And so he went to another one, and he went through the same process, achieved great samadhi. But he thought, this is not liberation. This is, non-dual, and you get all that experience, but it's not liberation. When you come out of meditation, you're still subject to aging, sickness, and death. And so he thought, okay, that's not the way. So then for 6 years, he practiced, with these ascetics in the forest. But realizing that torturing the body doesn't tame the mind, he relinquished this for the middle path of keeping the body healthy without indulging in sensual pleasure. So we call the middle path was developed that he discovered. So having gone through the meditation, having gone through the training with the ascetics, having come to, torturing your body is not going to be the answer either. How can I be healthy and well, but not too extreme one way or the other? This middle path was evolving. And then he came to a point in his practice where, he was pretty much ready for this. He felt he was close. And so then, sitting under a Bodhi tree in what is present-day Bodh Gaya, India, he determined to arise only after attaining full awakening. So he sat down with that determination. He knew he was pretty close. On the full moon of the 4th lunar month, the Buddhist holiday of Vesak, he completed the process of cleansing his mind of all obscurations and developing all good qualities, and became a Buddha, a fully awakened one. And that's really what Buddha means. I'm awake. 35 years old at the time, he spent the next 45 years teaching what he had discovered through his own experience to whomever came to hear. So he died at 80. So 35 awakening, 45 years teaching. The Buddha taught men and women of all ages, races, and social classes, royalty, beggars, merchants, officials, thieves, farmers, musicians, and prostitutes. Many of his students chose to relinquish the householder's life and adopt the monastic life, and thus the Sangha community of ordained beings was born. As his followers attained realizations and became skilled in teaching the Dharma, he asked them to share with others what they had realized for the welfare of the multitude, for the happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. That's a quote from one of the sutras. Thus, the Buddhist teaching spread throughout the Indian subcontinent, and in subsequent centuries to present-day Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, China, Korea, Japan, Central Asia, Tibet, Mongolia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. In recent years, Dharma centers have opened in locations all around the world. And then His Holiness says, personally speaking, I feel a deep connection with Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as a profound gratitude for his teachings and the example of how he lived his life, abiding in pure ethical conduct of a monastic and sharing the teachings impartially. The Buddha had insights into the workings of the mind that were previously unknown on the earth. He taught that our experiences of suffering and happiness are intricately related to our minds and emotions. Suffering is not thrust upon us by other people. It is a product of our ignorant views and beliefs. Happiness is not a gift from the gods. It is a result of our cultivation of wisdom and compassion. So, right there's something to talk about, right? Suffering's not thrust upon us by other people. It's a product of our own. I always cringe a little bit when I see the word ignorant, misguided views, misunderstood views, misperception and beliefs. And happiness is not a gift from the gods. It is a result of our cultivation of wisdom and compassion. So, just right there, good point to pause and recognize how different that can be from many of the religions of the world, and how empowering that is. That I actually have agency in my life to become free. I'm not a victim, not born with some original sin. Nobody's punishing me. I'm living this life due to my previous choices, and those previous choices that have me in my conditioned existence weren't based on me being a bad person. They were based on me not really understanding myself or my experience very well and trying to be happy. So, and everyone else is like that. We're all a prisoner of our conditioning. We're not bad people. It's not about original sin. It's about a misunderstanding of our experience, a misunderstanding of real causes of happiness, real causes of suffering, and our desire to be happy, and seeking it in ways that actually perpetuate this cycle of existence. And then we have the opportunity to change all that. So the Buddha's life was this example of someone who was a human and really sought this out to explore what is the true nature, is suffering necessary, and was willing to put in the effort to find out. So that's, for me, a really exciting, revelation. Wow, I'm not a prisoner. I'm not a victim. I'm just a human being that has been conditioned due to patterns and habits of limited understanding about myself and this thing we call life. And now it's been made available. Well, here's how it works. Wow. Hey, here's the guidebook. Here's how this works, And for me, that's just really exciting. Just get to the last couple paragraphs there. We'll pause again. The Buddha's life is a teaching in itself. He questioned the meaning of worldly life and reached the decision to practice the Dharma while facing pressure from his family and society to inherit the kingship. Despite the hardships he encountered, he practiced diligently and did not give up until he had attained full awakening. He dealt compassionately with people who berated him or criticized his teachings. Sometimes his followers were uncooperative and belligerent, but he did not give up on them. Although he sometimes had to address them sternly, the sutras show that he engaged with many different kinds of people with great skill and compassion, and he was completely uninterested in fame or praise. Reflecting on the kindness of the Buddha for providing teachings that suit the various dispositions and interests of the variety of sentient beings, I feel deep reverence. This is His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama talking. I hope that you too, by learning and practicing the Buddhist teachings, will develop this sense of personal connection with our teacher, the Buddha. So again, just a quick pause. That is really important to understand in the context of Buddhism. There's no dogma in Buddhism in the sense that, this is the authority of the voice of the Buddha that said this. As a matter of fact, the Buddha very plainly said, no, you kind of need to check it out. You don't say it's true because I said it, you need to test it. And when he taught, he was teaching to different people with different issues and different problems. And he wasn't always just teaching awakening, right? He was teaching how not to suffer. And so somebody's, one of the common things we'll mention, if somebody's struggling in their marriage, well, he's going to give some advice there, but not awakening. Somebody who needs some other types of guidance for some subsistence of being, able to be okay on just a physical level. He taught that. And he met people where they're at, and he gave them the teachings that were right for them and their situation. So there's not this, monolithic, here's what the Buddha taught, here's the teaching, and that's what we all need to do. Rather, here is the nature of suffering, here's the causes of suffering, and here are some methods to eliminate that suffering. And as we're going to find out that, here's the outline, here's how it works, right? The sort of roadmap of causes of suffering and the path of liberation. Then within that, there's going to be a wide range of practices for different kinds of people to engage in this path and unlock this basic recognition of their ultimate nature instead of the misperception of their self. And so there's going to be a wide range here. There's a framework, but there's going to be this wide range, and it'll meet different people in different ways, meeting them where they're at. So anyone have any thoughts or comments before we kind of tap into then the spread? And I'm going to guess that's Kurt raising his hand.
It is. Thank you. Glad to see everybody. Is samsara, did the idea or the actual word samsara exist before the Buddha? Did he come in? I mean, I know there's some overlap between some of the Hindu stuff and the Buddhist stuff, and I'm just wondering if samsara, if he came up with that or if that was already existent before he was born.
Yeah, so I don't know the history of the word samsara. That's out of my realm of knowledge. However, condition or sort of rebirth was very common, right? Cyclic existence was very common. That was the given in his time, that people are reborn and there's rebirth, and that there would be that cycle. Now, very different views on that, for example, with the caste system and different things like that. So the Buddha's explanation of samsara is going to be very different than the Hindu or so forth. But there was that was of course the way things are, that people were in a cycle of rebirth. But as far as the word samsara, I don't know the exact history or origin.
And I don't care so much about the word, just that he didn't come up with it whole cloth.
So aging, sickness, and death was very common, and rebirth was very common. That was known, right? And those are the four sufferings, that are common to all of us. All of us are gonna born, age, sick, die. That's the foundation of cyclic existence.
How about karma? Was there a concept of karma before that?
Sure.
Before him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and he not reinterpreted, but figured out something different.
He
shared how it all fit together.
Right. He investigated it and then explained what he had realized about it directly. Yeah. So, for example, even with the two meditation teachers they went to, which are the greatest, at those times, you can achieve, these sort of, great states, but they weren't free from aging, sickness, and death, right? So he was like, wait a minute, Let's see if we can't really explore this more deeply. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, I mean, that's why he went to study. I mean, there were yogis way before him. There was these wandering ascetics way before. As a matter of fact, it was just great back then. Like, people would support people in India doing that. You know, you would feed them, take care of them. You'd see people that are seekers on a spiritual path, and that was in abundance. And something that had been around. I mean, they had refined meditation way before the Buddha was on the scene. And so an incredible spiritual and dynamic community of seekers that were already prevalent way before the Buddha was walking the earth. And so that's something that India has great contributions towards. The Buddha's big innovation, and then we'll get to Rana, is this union of shamatha and vipassana. Okay, so that they excuse me, they had refined, I mean, these really going through the jhanas, very subtle levels of mind, incredible states of samadhi. But what the Buddha's big innovation was that rather than go through all the jhanas, he remembered a time when he was younger and he kind of slipped in this state that we call shamatha, the state of calm abiding, which is actually at the first jhana. So it's kind of, as you go through these very subtle states of mind, you go first, then you move on, and the mind gets more and more subtle. And as it gets subtle, right, you're beyond any concepts and constructs or sense of self or any of those things. But you kind of bypass then a faculty of the mind that would help you realize the nature of self. At the first jhana, when you're just resting in the natural state of the mind, the very what Alan Wallace calls substrate consciousness, or Bhavanga, I think would be in the other texts, is just the very nature of the mind, non-conceptual, luminous, just resting there. But it's not super subtle. It's still, if you wanted to have a thought, you could still have access to picking up a thought and then looking at it directly. And so that was actually his big innovation, was to achieve that degree of shamatha where he could rest in that state for days, in that state of mind, where he still had the ability to then bring in a vipassana, an insight, and then saturate his mind with that insight. So his big innovation was to back down, that, so going through the highest samadhi, back it down, rest in that, and then engage in vipassana type meditation, that great insight. And with the stability of mind of shamatha, to unify those, and then having that direct realization, being able to rest in that shamatha state, to let your mind completely be saturated by that realization for days on end, to ultimately purify the mind, is how he woke up. So that was his unique innovation compared to what was out there so far. And in that state, and in those they call the watches of the night within his meditation, like he saw his multiple lifetimes, he saw all that directly. He was, all these things he was able to see, and the point that he makes is that all of us can do that too. All of us can do that. There's nothing unique about him in that sense. We can all do this. All we need to do is develop shamatha, do some vipassana, and create the conditions that would make that ripen, which is, by the way, a lot of what we'll be talking about in the future, ethical conduct and so forth. But we can all do it. Rhonda.
Hi, everyone. What came to mind with Kurt's question was the other innovation was the 12 links of dependent origination, which Geshe Dorje Dumdul said that Shakyamuni Buddha requested back in his time, that at each monastery, whoever visited one of his monasteries, that there would be a depiction of the 12 links, and there would be a monk that would be designated that would teach that teaching to anyone who came. So to the whole karma and how to break the cyclic existence, I think that was the other big innovation that Shakyamuni Buddha brought, as it's been taught to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is within the Tibetan tradition. You'll see the prayer halls. They'll have what's called the wheel of life, right, on the outside. They'll have that right there. The outer rim is those 12 links that Ron is talking about. The inner, you're going to see the 6 realms of existence, and within that, the inner wheel, the 3 poisons, the depiction of negative karma, the depiction of positive karma, and this wheel of life, which is right there at every Tibetan monastery, is the whole thing. It's the whole thing, Rhonda, right? It's the whole deal. It's right there in a visual representation. It is the whole of the teaching, and it talks about the 3 poisons that give rise to this karma. Some karma brings you down, some karma brings you up. Within conditioned existence, or the 6 realms of existence, the outer wheel is the 12 links of dependent arising, and then how you break that link, right, at 1 o'clock at wisdom, and it all unfolds, breaks apart. And so the teaching on that was when that was painted, and presented, I think to a particular, I think it was for a king, that his mind was so ripe just upon seeing it all, like he awakened. And so, so you'll find that sitting, right there on all of these Tibetan monasteries. Yeah.
Tenzin Palmo has a series on YouTube that's really brilliant about the wheel, and she goes into each part of the wheel and describes it. It's really worth watching.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the good book, The Meaning of Life. It's Dalai Lama again, the wheel. Pema Chodron has that. Tenzin Palmo has an incredible series on the wheel of life, going into all those. But yeah, it's the whole deal right there in one, one image, or one painting with multiple images. But those 12 links kind of explain how this all happens, and what that, how it imprisons us. But it doesn't imprison us. We imprison ourselves based on this arising. Okay. So here was a human being who wanted to really explore this, did the work to do it. There's some different takes. Some people say he was a bodhisattva to begin with, who came in the human form to show us this. Others, pretty common views, just a human being who engaged in the path and showed us that, we can do all this. And the thing to know about the Buddha, he wasn't a god, he wasn't, any of these things. There's a very famous teaching where someone asked him, what are you? Are you a god? Are you this? Are you that? What are you? Are you human? And he looked at me, he said, I'm awake. I'm awake. And the awakened one, I know who I am. And that's our fundamental flaw, is we don't know who we are. We identify me and mine with that, which is not me and mine. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly touch upon the spread of Dharma and elicit, I think, the key points, basically, but just a little historical perspective. And what I think His Holiness and Bhikshuni Thubten children want to share here ultimately is that as Buddhism spread, it humans were involved. Let's put it that way. Humans were involved, right? Egos, power, politics, all these things got involved. And so you're going to have these fracturings, and you're going to have these claims that this is the authentic, and you're going to have these other ones, and you're going to have these struggles around that. And Buddhism's going to evolve in different ways, in different cultures, and in whether you're a rural community or in a city and so forth. And then out of all this, what we have today, I think they're pointing out here pretty clearly, is there's a lot of misperceptions about how we would even think of Theravadins or a Pali Canon and the Mahayana teachings. And a lot of this is to clarify that. And they start with this very important point. The historical evolution of Buddhism is fluid and dynamic, right? It's a fluid and dynamic process that brought forth various schools, traditions, and tenet systems. Okay, dynamic, fluid, evolving. We may speak of one school or another as if they were distinct entities with clear boundaries. However, Buddhism on the ground, right, in life, was not so clear. We see this even today with the Theravada monastics who take bodhisattva precepts, right, within the Mahayana tradition. So you've got Theravada monks taking bodhisattva vows. Practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism who are ordained, right, they'll actually go to China and ordain in their tradition a lot of nuns, because there isn't the higher ordination within the Tibetan culture, and they'll go to China and, well, Taiwan, and they'll get ordained in that tradition. So here we got Bhikshuni Thubten Chodron, who wrote these books, ordained in that tradition, right? And she's a Tibetan nun. So's Tenzin Palmo. So Chinese monastics are practicing insight meditation as taught in the Pali Canon and so forth. So there's even today all of this, and it's beautiful to watch, this intermingling. I think it's actually more acceptable today than even, maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Much more intermingling there. I was able to sit in when I was a monk at the Western Buddhist, conference, Western monastics conference, so all the Western monks and nuns, and we would all gather once a year, and it would be hosted by different places. And I got to, stay at a Pure Land Chinese monastery, and we had the Theravadins and the Tibetans, and, and just this incredible interchange of ideas and thoughts and support. So today, much more, I think, open and sharing than not so long ago. And I think they're kind of trying to address that point here. So it's important to keep in mind when discussing Buddhist history that we can't say for sure what happened in the past. In our present lives, our memory of a specific event differs from that of the person standing next to us. History appears differently according to our perspective. Each person selects certain details to focus on, and the interpretation of those events varies from person to person. Despite the subjectivity of history, it is nevertheless useful to have a general knowledge of the historical background of the Dharma we study. And so he's actually going to give a very detailed, he and Bhikshuni Thubten Chodron, very detailed, which we're not going to get caught up in all the minutiae of that. But here's something I think we should all know, is how the teachings started and how they spread. So they started with this first council. So after the Buddha's passing, 500 arhats gathered together. Okay, arhats, these are realized beings, gathered together at Rajira to recite the Buddha's discourses at what came to be called the first council. So this is the first council. They got together, and they all recalled what the Buddha taught, and then they systematized them. And then different ones were assigned to, memorize, recite, and then these would be passed down. Now, they're not going to be direct quotes sometimes because, well, let me just get, I'll say, excuse me. in the early centuries, these sutras were passed down orally, principally by the Manakas, the monastics whose duty it was to memorize and recite the scriptures. Each group of Banakas was assigned a group of scriptures, and for many centuries, every successive generation of them memorized these texts, taught them to others. Although the Buddha did not repeat verbatim every talk he gave on a particular topic, passages of certain important themes were standardized for ease in memorization. Thus, there were stock phrases and passages in some almost identical sutras. So you're gonna, they want to make it where you can memorize and a rhythm to them and so forth. So so the essence of these teachings were memorized, they're passed down, and incredibly accurately. And people would say, well, how would you know it's accurate? And actually, there's quite a bit of research. There's a Bhikkhu Analio, who's just this incredible monk, practitioner, scholar of just a realm I can't even quite comprehend. I was listening to one of his talks where it was a different lineage, actually, tradition of these young kids that were taught to memorize, and that was their, they're born to memorize. In their family, that would be their assigned task, and the idea was that they would have them memorize these words and these cadences without them even knowing what they mean. Right? They grew up reciting these, and this is what's done at Tibetan universities. So at my monastery, little monks are memorizing hundreds of pages of text that they have no idea what it means. And what they've done with the research is realize that they're going to be a lot more accurate than if you actually knew what the words meant. If we know what the words meant, we kind of conflate it with our schema of what we know. And then you can kind of put something in or take it out. And there's a pretty big, famous sort of research with Microsoft, as a matter of fact, around giving someone directions. And if you could give someone directions, someone who doesn't know anything about what you're giving them, versus someone who has a little bit of knowledge or someone who knows a lot, and the recall and the way that they're able to address the directions of people who didn't know, did much better. And likewise with the oral traditions of ancient cultures, you're going to find that through this repetitive process, especially if you start young, they're going to actually be able to recite them extremely accurately. And then they found these texts in different parts of the world that would be verbatim. So these were passed down that way for hundreds of years. They had a second council, I think the book says around 383. Is it BCE? Yeah. And then they codified everything, and then ultimately they would get written down, and then they were written down in different languages, and ultimately at some point Buddhaghosa, I think, was the predominant person who wrote in the Pali Canon. So Pali Canon was not the first written language, but it is the sort of oldest language of canons that they had found in a lot of people. And one of the misperceptions is that it is by far like the old, the closest to the Buddha's words. And so that's what was addressed here, is that they've actually found texts that were written that would even be with Mahayana themes and Mahayana teachings that were older than some of the texts that are in the Pali Canon. So one of the sort of the misperceptions is that this is the ultimate authority of the Pali Canon. In fact, there were other texts written down in different languages that are older and they found some, I think, in Afghanistan even, and Pakistan. And so the point being made is that there's a big intermingling and different types of monasteries and teachings, ultimately would want to say we're the right one, you're not. And that there was some sort of big differentiation between Theravada and Mahayana when actually they both existed in the same times. And then one of the big points that was made was that these great universities, I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but the first international residential university in history, it was in India. It's called Nalanda. And so it was actually a Buddhist university. It was the first international by hundreds and hundreds of years, before Europe or anything. They had at one point something like 10,000 students from all over the world. They had teachers that were like 1,500 teachers at one point. And this was, it's filled with astrology and logic. And within that were these incredible Buddhist pundits and scholars and this really ripe, incredible university dynamically focusing on these teachings and practices. And there was all mixtures, Mahayana, Theravada, what we call Theravada now, the tantric teachings were there. They're all there. And this, it was for like 700 to 800 years it lasted. It was this incredible dynamic university that was ultimately wiped out with the Muslim invasions. But with these great scholars, with this big intermingling, Buddhism didn't have all these varying, there wasn't a Mahayana school. There's no Mahayana school. There's these teachings that were always available, and different cultures they resonated with in different ways. There's a very really famous Chinese monastic who basically, he went to Nalanda, he spent all the time there, studied, trained, and then he brought back these incredible texts to China. And so, most of Chinese Buddhism was influenced by that. And then these great teachers, wound up in, spreading it to Tibet and so forth. And so when we really look at the spread of Buddhism, I think there's three schools mentioned by His Holiness, these three great universities within the big thriving time of Indian Buddhism, that they all intermingled, they mixed, they debated, they practiced, they, just tore into these teachings. And then you got these great commentaries and practitioners, and they wound up throughout all Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and China, Tibet, Japan. This whole Zen tradition eventually came out of that as well. And they're very different flavors, right? Zen Buddhism in Japan is going to be very different than walking into a Buddhist temple with all our stuff on there. It's going to be very different. Tantric teachings are there, and the Vajrayana teachings are there. Matter of fact, His Holiness, they often will talk about being the Nalanda tradition. These great scholars that dove in deeply to the very nature of existence. And so these teachings spread, and they were all vibrant. The big tragedy was, with the Muslim invasions and the different changes that went on, the complete destruction of Nalanda, where they burnt this incredible library of texts. Buddhism actually faded from India. So Buddhism faded completely from India. But it thrived in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, China, Tibet. It thrived in these other areas, but it really disappeared from India. They've actually, they've uncovered the old Nalanda and excavated, much of it, and there's now a new Nalanda University. India is, it's their pride and joy. There's actually about 10 kilometers from the actual original one. They have a new Nalanda University that they've brought up and keeping that tradition alive. So that's pretty amazing. All right, Rhonda.
Just a shout out for Nalanda. If you want to study any of the Nalanda teachings through Tibet House Delhi, they offer a Nalanda master's course that basically goes through the Vaibhashika, Satantrika, Chittamatra, and explains, the basics of the Nalanda course. And I think it's like 700 rupees or something. It's like ridiculously inexpensive. So if you're interested, check it out, Tibet House Delhi.
Yeah, it costs like nothing, right? But their hours are a little fun, if I recall looking that up.
No, it's an online. You can.
Is it self-paced? I thought there were lectures.
So you have to keep up with the weekly teachings, but Geshe Dorji Dumdul, he realizes that there are students around the world, so he records the sessions as well. So if you're not in the Indian time zone, you can watch it on your own time zone. Yeah.
Oh, good to know. So all of us can be Nalanda University student. That's pretty awesome. So this then spread, and then and I want to get to this main points that I think's really been critical through all of this. The points that are being made by His Holiness and by Bhikshu and Thubten Chodron is
just tell her thank you for that.
Is that it's not about this one's better than that one, or this is the right one, that's wrong. That they are all complementary, and that they are all, even through all the humanness, through all the power struggles, through all of the political intrigue, through which king you got the attention to say your monastery is going to be the right one, all those things. The essence of the Dharma and the ripening of those practices bears fruit. And so speaking from my own experience, having lived at a very large monastery, not everybody was a pretty ripe monk, a lot of humans. But they all created the conditions for this very few to wake up, to awaken. And so at a monastery like mine that had 1,500 monks, there's going to be these few that are just, they're awake. But there's going to be a lot of us normal ones, and then a lot of knuckleheads, and a lot of everything in between. But all are complementary to creating the conditions for awakening. And they all contribute in their own way. Likewise, all of these teachings do that, and so I think they do a really nice piece here. I'm going to see if we can unpack it briefly. It's not a long piece, but we go to how he then will approach these teachings as a cohesive whole. So just a reminder, these sort of categories of teaching would be, Theravada monks, a lot of the Pali canon. Then we have these Mahayana teachings, which are Bodhisattva path. Within that, there's also these Vajrayana teachings, like tantric teachings, and that's mostly Tibetan. And so they get categorized in different ways, but what they're going to explain here is how they all really work together. So, seen in the previous chapter, Buddha provided a wide variety of teachings depending on the disposition, interest of various audiences. Oops, you can't see this, can you? I keep just switching to that without hitting the share screen. I should take a mindfulness course. Okay, so there are many ways to systematize these teachings that reveal how they form a cohesive whole and build on each other, leading us to an even deeper understanding of the Dharma. One is according to the three capacities of practitioners, and we'll be discussing it later in chapter 7. He says, we've gone over that a couple of times. Another is the 4 tenet systems, briefly mentioned previous chapter. That's what actually Rhonda was just identifying, which will be elaborated in future. So basically, those are some things that'll be coming up. These texts can present the philosophical views of all 4 tenet systems, text presenting the paths of 3 vehicles, and text presenting the practices of both Sutrana and Tatrana. So there's these ways of presenting it, but they're going to pick this one, which is the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. I think, yeah, here we go. The 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma are often described as, when the Buddha taught, it was a turning of the wheel of Dharma, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Often they talk about the 4 noble truths, and then later turning. So 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So turning the Dharma wheel refers to the Buddha giving teachings that lead sentient beings to temporary happiness within cyclic existence, and to the highest goodness of liberation and full awakening. From the perspective of the Sanskrit tradition, as described in the sutra, Unraveling the Thought, the Buddha turned the Dharma wheel 3 times, with each turning primarily addressing the needs of a specific group of disciples. The teachings of the first turning form the foundation of the Buddhist practice for all 3 vehicles. So this is the foundation. This is universal. This is critical. The first turning. At the same time, they fulfill the specific needs of the Shravakas who seek personal liberation. The first turning began with the Buddha's first discourse at Deer Park in Sarnath, India, during which he delineated the main framework for training the mind in the 4 truths of the Aryas. Right, so that foundational teaching. When describing the 4th truth, the truth of the path, he taught the 37 aids to awakening, which established procedures for putting the 4 truths into practice. The 37 aids relate to 2 primary methods of training. The first leading to serenity, shamatha, single-pointed mind. The second bringing forth insight, deep understanding. Now you have the union, right? Shamatha, vipassana. To put these 37 in the context of the 3 higher trainings, we begin practicing the higher training in ethical conduct to eliminate coarse negativities of body and speech. He's just going to break this all down and be really concise. But I do want to point out, earlier I said all we need to do is shamatha and vipassana, right? But then we need the conditions to do it. Okay, so now we've got these 37 things that might get us there, right? On this basis, we cultivate, so first ethics, then serenity in the higher training of concentration, and then insight, the higher training. So those are the 3 higher trainings: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. The 37 aids can be divided into 7 sets. There will be a test on this later. 4 establishments of mindfulness, 4 supreme strivings, 4 bases of supernormal power, 5 faculties, 5 powers, 7 awakening factors, and the Eightfold Noble Path, which are the principal practices. Vasubandhu and the Treasury of Knowledge and Asanga and the Compendium of Knowledge correlate their full-fledged practice with successive levels of the 5 paths. So the 5 paths would be these evolution to awakening, beginning with renunciation. In that context, they are set out sequentially. The following is Vasubandhu's presentation. So this is really cool. I've never really had this specific teaching myself. So I was all like, woo, let me look into this. The first set is the 4 establishments of mindfulness. mindfulness of body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So a lot of people are aware of that. As we deepen our practice in these four, we'll gain greater enthusiasm and vigor to engage in wholesome activities, good ethics. This leads us to make effort in the four supreme strivings. So now he's going to put them sequentially. First, the four establishments of mindfulness, then the four supreme strivings to abandon non-virtues already generated, prevent destructive ones in the future, enhance virtues have already been generated, and generate new virtues in the future. That really ties into what we sort of right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path. This idea of striving to reduce the destructive ones, increase our virtuous ones. Then by engaging in ethical conduct, such as avoiding destructive actions and enhancing and engaging in constructive ones, we'll develop a certain clarity of mind and single-pointedness. This leads us to practice the third set, the four bases of spiritual power: aspiration, effort, intention, and investigation, which are methods to enhance our capabilities to remain focused single-pointedly on a chosen object of meditation. Now we got shamatha. We've covered the ethics. We're into the shamatha. When we have single-pointed concentration that can last for prolonged periods of time, all our other virtuous spiritual faculties will be enhanced. They actually say that when you're able to do that, you eradicate the five hindrances. Just they're gone. Then we will increase the five powers: faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, and the five forces, which basically strengthen those same five qualities. When these forces are fully developed, we will progress to practice the seven awakening factors. These seven awakening factors: correct mindfulness, discrimination of phenomenon, effort, rapture, pliancy, concentration, equanimity. This leads us to fully follow the core of the Buddhist path, the Eightfold Noble Path: right view, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Through practicing these 37 aids, our minds will be transformed and we'll attain liberation from cyclic existence. That is literally the path of an arhat laid out. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma. So that was the first, that was what was practiced. And then, as we discussed last time, when I mentioned Bhikkhu Bodhi's talk, people started diving into what's it like to be a Buddha. Okay, there's liberation, there's not, well, what about Buddha? And those teachings are there, the Bodhisattva path's there, the Mahayana's there. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma contains, now these are the wisdom teachings, the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the wisdom teachings, the Buddhist teachings on the perfection of wisdom, elaborating on the topic of selflessness that the Buddha described briefly in the first turning. Here he explains that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. So typically in the first turning, a lot of Theravada, the idea is I am empty. This is actually explaining everything's empty. Okay. So it's not just not self, it's also phenomena is empty. He also clarifies the meaning of the truth of cessation as the emptiness of a mind from which defilements have been eradicated, giving an extensive explanation of the six perfections: generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, joyous effort, meditative stability, and wisdom. By the way, that'll be our topic at retreat, March 30th, 606. So this is the Bodhisattva path. This comes in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where it really unpacks wisdom and a Bodhisattva path. The second turning also elaborates the truth of the path for Bodhisattvas. The principal and appropriate audience for the sutras in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma are spiritual aspirants who understand the teachings of the first turning and, in addition, aspire for full awakening of Buddhahood. Right? So they know the Arhat path, they know these teachings, they have a foundation, but the aspiration is Buddhahood, right? Bodhisattva path. So I'm looking at time here, so I'm just going to skip down. The third turning, and by the way, the very famous teaching on the Heart Sutra, he points out here, was taught at Vulture's Peak in India. So really famous teaching. This is the Heart Sutra, again, the wisdom teachings. Now, the third turning of Dharma contains two categories of sutras. The first one furnishes further explanation of the truth of the path and presents a different interpretation of the Prajnaparamita Sutra statement that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. This I'm not that knowledgeable of, so I'm not going to go far there because it's out of my realm. But what's being stated here is that there's an explanation that kind of is available for people who are not ripe yet to really understand emptiness. Again, out of my wheelhouse, but what he's saying here is these third turning sutras were taught primarily to benefit those trainees who were inclined towards bodhisattva path, but not yet suitable vessels for the teaching on the absence of inherent existence. So they weren't ripe. They're afraid that they might fall into, this nihilism. Is it nihilism or nihilism? I always go back and forth on that. I know one of you knows, probably Rhonda.
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, both are correct. Yeah.
Potato kind of thing. All right. So, it's actually dangerous. There's actually a vow to not teach emptiness to those who are unripe, because you can do a lot of damage. So a lot of people, this can they get lost, if everything's empty, then nothing matters. Okay, now you lost them. There's a lot of damage that's done. And so you really need to be thoughtful about how you present emptiness or dependent origination. So this third turning has these teachings, which I'm not familiar with, but it's really nice. What he said is, for their benefit, the Buddha spoke about naturelessness instead of emptiness in relation to different natures of phenomenon. So it's like a skillful way. Rather than think all phenomena without exception are empty of inherent existence, Buddha taught these trainees that different phenomena are empty of different kinds of natures. So it sounds like a really skillful way to kind of work with that. But the main point of this third turning that I'm a little more aware of, as it's in my training, is the second category, which speaks about our potential to become fully awakened being, Buddha nature, right? Our Buddha nature. And these sutras present and develop the clear light nature of mind and Buddha nature. This category includes sutras such as, I'll list these long sutras, but essentially the tantric teachings, right? Vajrayana path teachings. So this is going to be really prevalent in all of Tibetan Buddhism, this Buddha nature, how we use the clear light nature of the mind, how we transform, how we actually take the result of the path as the path, and really skillful method. So that was in the third. And then here, I want him to summarize. I'm looking at our time here. Yeah, last paragraph. Without a foundation in the core teachings of the fundamental vehicle, proclaiming oneself to be a follower of Mahayana is meaningless. In other words, anyone who's debating Theravadan's not that good, I'm a Mahayana. Okay, you're out. No, that's boring. Can't even claim to be a Mahayana practitioner unless you are rooted in these very fundamental teachings. We need to have a broad, inclusive understanding of the Buddhist teachings to avoid generating mistaken notions. Without doing so, we risk disparaging the teachings of the Buddha by saying either that they are limited in scope or that they are not authentic. It's important to understand that these vehicles and their teachings complement each other. They meet the needs of different kinds of people at different places in their lives and in this rich path of experience in a very dynamic way as our cultures and people change. We should embody the essence of all these teachings in our personal practice. part of what I skipped in there is His Holiness also saying, and by the way, the Tibetans, kind of think they have all the teachings because, we embrace them all. Without disparaging the other ones. So, but the rich view here is that they're all meaningful. They're all teachings of the Buddha, and they've all developed over, all these centuries, meeting the needs of specific people in specific cultures in ways that are beneficial to them. And they all are leading to liberation. So, not to get the mind this way is better and that one's not. For me, a common thing when I taught high school, same thing. I'm a school teacher, learning how to teach high school methods. And people say, this is the best form of instruction. And then somebody else had this research, this is the best form of instruction. And, I was kind of a group collaborative teacher. I'd put people in groups and we'd call this complex instruction. Other people were direct instruction teacher, speaking and giving examples and all that. And you have all these research, what's the best way for kids to learn this and that. All of which doesn't work because certain people are better teachers in groups and certain people are better teachers, not in groups, and certain people, have different strengths and kids have different needs. So the more important question when I was a school teacher was, what's the best way for this group of kids to learn from me? And it's not the right way. Another teacher, it would be a different method because of who they are, and then a different group of kids because of who they are. And so what I found in my years of being a high school teacher was I would be different in different classes. I would tend to be more of a group collaborative teacher because that's how I function best. And I could have friends and colleagues who did not function well at all in that setting, who were incredible teachers. And kids got their needs met because they were adapting to who they were. And so Buddhism, I view in that way that's being shared here is that to avoid dogma, to avoid the idea of this is right and that's wrong, but to embrace what the Buddha taught as core to our suffering and struggle, our misperception, and what are the methods in this structure that are beneficial for who we are to incorporate in our lives in ways that will allow us to recognize our misperceptions and wake up to who we are. And they're going to vary, even within the very same lineages, some people like, a lot of ritual, some people don't like very ritual at all. Some people, are very, very good with prayer. Some people avoid, some people, emphasize, this or that in their life. And so the idea is that we recognize the value of all these teachings, and we find teachers in teachings that we can, that are beneficial to us. And then the side note, asterisk point, is we don't just look for the teachings and teachers that make us feel good, right? Because the real growth on the path is often looking at which I don't want to look at. And sometimes, the teacher's job is to show you your mind. That's unpleasant sometimes, very unpleasant. But it's what's needed. So the idea is, find, the teaching, find the path, and engage in it, and fit it into your life in a way that's meaningful, but don't be too, this resonates, that resonates. Oh, I don't like that. And because then I'm just picking what I like, and then I got a nice collection of Dharma stuff, but no change in who I am, because I'm just picking the things that reinforce what I already believe. The point here is to question and to investigate and unpack and discover and then find our freedom. So and find and then don't get all superior, Oh yeah, we're Mahayanas, man. Those other people are selfish, self-centered, arhats, or arhats, the Theravadins. Those Mahayanas, man, they don't know anything. Here's the real teaching of the Pali Canon, and all that other stuff's made up woohoo. And and then in the Tibetan tradition, Galupas, Austrian Galupas, man, those Nyingmas. Okay, sorry, I'm busting up because I'm having some of the old dialogue in my mind. Man, they don't know anything. They're just meditating all the time. When they meditate, they don't know anything. They don't study anything. And then the Nyingmas are looking at the Galupas. What are they doing? Sticking their head in books. You're not going to know anything until you realize it. You need to meditate. What the heck? What a waste of time. And so even in that, you got this wonderful plan. But you also have these incredibly, rich teachers like Tenzin Palmo. We're sitting with her and we're going through all this, and and the richness of the scholarly approach and the richness of the Dzogchen, experiential approach, and how we need them all, for different people. And so that's really the point being made here, is that as we engage in this path, we want to recognize that it's really about the proof is in the pudding. Is it working for people? Are there legitimate, authentic, realized beings within these different traditions? And you're going to find, that if there are, there's some good stuff there. And you'll find them in each of these lineages. And then you also find some that don't have those, right? That have kind of gone astray. And, those teachers might be not the ones to follow. Do our due diligence, but recognize that the faults of this path might have more to do with human greed and misperception than the essence of the teachings. And we want to look at where those essence of the teachings through these different practices have been beneficial, and that's why it's important to identify people that have what you want, in a sense, as we'd say in another program. And embody that, and you go, okay, let me test that out. So within our tradition, it said if you spend 10 years watching a teacher, you have not wasted 10 years before you ask them to be your teacher, because you see how they act and what they uphold and what their students are like and so forth. So a lot of richness, and that we can learn from each other and in all the lineages. And so that's happening much more now. It's happening much more. It's wonderful to see. All right, we went a little long tonight, but it was quite a bit. I was studying that on the plan. I was thinking, there's no way I could have taught that this morning at 6 a.m. Not that I taught anything. I just sharing what they shared, but. All right, so anyone have any question for clarity before we dedicate? Okay. We love all of the lineages. We're all good. Okay. I'm going to pop up our dedication and then we'll wrap up. Scooch that. And by the way, we're going to have the monks in June. We're going to have the monks in Carbondale. So if you want to come out, June 23rd through 28th, I have them out for a week. Okay, let us take a moment to recognize what an incredibly rare and precious opportunity we have had to meet with these teachings from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and Bhikshuni Thubten Chodron and all the others that contributed to bringing them to life for us. And for all of us supporting each other in developing our hearts and minds in ways that are meaningful for the benefit of all beings. and let us now dedicate. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu